we were just talking at lunch and we were saying how Hong Kong used to be seen as like the premier place in Asia for things like trusts and wealth management and so on. Obviously, Singapore has pretty much taken over now in terms of being seen as number one. What are the biggest changes you've seen, would you say, in the last 20 to 30 years in Singapore when it comes to business and also how Singapore is perceived by overseas clients?
One of the biggest reasons why there's more wealth flowing in, it's due to the policies by the government and the trust, generally people around the world, that they have trust with the Singapore government. With that stability, of course, then there's the trust that you have that your money is safe here, right?
Hi everyone, so this is Adam and I'm joined today by Kenneth today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Adam, for having me here.
Pleasure. So Kenneth, tell me a bit about your story and how you came to doing what you do, which is essentially corporate services, right? And trusts and other services like that.
Well, actually, what I specialize in is mostly wealth distribution planning. So I actually discuss with families on how they want to distribute their wealth to the next generation, how they want to, maintain harmony when their children inherit their assets. So that's my specialty. So I think of it like an architect. Like if you want to build a house, you get the tilers, the electrician, the plumbers. So for myself, I come up with the idea. I listen to your stories, get to know you, get to know your family, get to know the beneficiaries. What are the possible implications for some of your decisions? And from there, come up with some strategies for you to choose to see what is the best way to move forward with your plan. So I work with trustees, I work with lawyers, I work with external asset managers, with tax consultants. So these are the other professionals which I work with. So to me, I'm just one part of your plan, but it's also a very important part of your plan. Yeah. And going back to your question, how I came into this this line is actually, funnily, I started out as a musician. Yeah, so I started teaching music. I started teaching wind band, and pedagogy was one of my favorite things to do, was my passion. Teaching young students how to learn an instrument from scratch. And eventually I decided to grow my career and I went into insurance, decided to try something new. And when I went into insurance, that's where I realized that there is a little gap where people are missing. And that gap is what happens after you pass away and your family gets the insurance payout, right? Because we're always taught, if you're young, you have a child, you should buy some insurance so that your family can have something if something happens to you. But my question has always been how, right? So that's where I started to delve a lot into estate planning. And about 6 years ago, I started to focus more on it, took necessary papers, studied with the right people, got mentorship, and started to deal more deeply into this topic on wealth distribution. So I see it also as an extension to my original passion, music and pedagogy, because teaching music is about problem solving. So in the same way, when I discuss with clients about their issues, I'm also teaching them about possible tools, possible methods that they can use to solve their problems or decrease the possibility of from a big problem to a small problem. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. From music to insurance and now more trust services and estate planning.
Yeah.
But we're talking before this interview and you've lived in Singapore, obviously, I think for your entire life, right?
Yep.
And you must have seen so many changes here. So before we delve more deeply into business, what would you say are the main changes you've seen in Singapore in terms of the business environment? So for example, we were just talking at lunch and we were saying how Hong Kong used to be seen as like the premier place in Asia for things like trusts and wealth management and so on. Obviously, Singapore has pretty much taken over now in terms of being seen as number one. What are the biggest changes you've seen, would you say, in the last 20 to 30 years in Singapore when it comes to business and also how Singapore is perceived by overseas clients?
I think that one of the biggest reasons why there's more wealth flowing in, it's due to the policies by the government and the trust that the people, and by people I don't just mean Singaporeans, but generally people around the world, that they have trust with the Singapore government. With that stability, of course, then there's the trust that you have that your money is safe here, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, a few years ago, if we talk about, let's say, mass market first, right? Estate planning was not so popular about 6-7 years ago in Singapore, but now it's growing. It's a growing trend because people start to realize that, hey, I need to get a will. Do I need to get a trust? And so you have trust companies that started to come up that caters to different levels of wealth for people, and the price of wills started to get cheaper. Mm-hmm. People used to think that only the wealthy needs a will, but now people are slowly getting to realize that everyone needs a will, no matter your social status. So I think that the turning point was probably about 6-7 years ago when people started to realize that, yes, these are things that I need to avoid possible issues in the future for my beneficiaries. And that's for the mass market. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, for the high net worth, the ultra high net worth, they've always had access to such services. But I think the changes was when the government allowed the tax-free with the 13O or 13U tax incentive, where if you are a family office, you do not have to pay tax on your income and all that. So I think that grew the family office market a lot in Singapore. So a lot of wealth came in, and of course that built a whole ecosystem of people that needed to manage that kind of wealth in Singapore. So I think that was a very, very big change, in the past few years that has been happening in Singapore. Mm-hmm. And also because of our geographical location. We are in Asia, but we work a lot with Western countries. So we have the trust of Asians. We also have the trust of the Western countries. So I think that puts us in a very sweet spot on why a lot of wealth is flowing to Singapore, compared to Hong Kong a few years ago.
Absolutely. Some people say Singapore is like the Dubai or the New York of this part of the world, right? And it's definitely considered one of the top destinations now for wealth. Now, when it comes to trusts, of course, most people setting up trusts is more for wealth preservation as opposed to just growing your wealth. Because if you just want to grow your wealth in isolation, you don't need a trust to do that, right? So it's more about protection. Now, what are the biggest reasons, would you say, why people come to you for trusts? Because most of your clients, it seems, are actually, if I'm not mistaken, outside of Singapore or foreigners in Singapore, and local Singaporeans are a minority of your clients. But for both cases, why do you think people set up trusts? There must be like 2 or 3 key reasons why they do that, right?
So I think, of course, the number one reason which the number one reason why people who want to set up a trust definitely is due to preservation. They do not want their assets or the wealth to disintegrate over time. And this is true, this is true across all cultures, right? In the Chinese, they have this saying called "fu bu guo san dai," means your wealth doesn't last 3 generations.
Yes.
And of course, in the US, you have big families like the Vanderbilts, who are very, very wealthy, but without proper administration and overspending, they're basically non-existent now, right? So I think trust, it's the best instrument to preserve your wealth, and it's also the best instrument to protect your wealth. Most of the clients would want to set up a trust, not just for preservation, but to protect the wealth against possible creditors and sometimes against family members also. Now, that's something that's quite controversial to say sometimes, but it's actually something that's very normal nowadays because a lot of people are just worried that their child marries someone that might not have the best interest at heart. So a trust actually helps to protect their assets from going into the hands of the wrong people. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's funny because before we go on to that issue, what you said about the Vanderbilts is very true, because if you compare the Rockefellers to the Vanderbilts, apparently one of the things the Rockefellers did was they set up what was called the Rockefeller Waterfall method, where they had a trust and they got life insurance against the trust and they built this whole system. Whereas the Vanderbilts actually didn't do that. And that's often used as like a comparison between like two different methods. But what you were just saying is fascinating, because I think obviously in the world we live in today, where people can be a bit sensitive all around the world, they want to sometimes sound politically correct. I guess in reality, most people don't come to people like you and I and say, well, look, the reason I want to set up a trust is that I'm worried about my daughter or son, marrying someone who's a gold digger, right? Most people don't just say it openly in the first conversation. But as you say, there are a lot of emotional reasons why people set up trusts. Ditto litigation. Most people won't just come out with the statement that, oh, I want to set up a trust because I'm worried that in 5 or 10 years I'm going to get sued. But in reality, that's a big factor for some people. But as you say, probably the family dynamic is a bigger one. And what's also interesting is, if I'm not mistaken, Singapore and also numerous countries for that matter do not recognize prenuptial agreements. So I think for some people, it negates that need, right? If you actually have the trust looking after the assets, right?
Yep. First thing first, I'd like to just clarify that I'm not a lawyer, but what I understand is that prenuptial agreements and postnuptial agreements in Singapore are not recognized, but are used as a guideline when it comes to divorce. So if it makes sense to the judge, they might follow. If it doesn't make sense to the judge, they might throw it out, or they might just take certain parts of it as a guideline. So, but you're absolutely right that the most efficient way to protect your assets against a divorce is putting in a trust. Yep. So I think that's something that a lot of my expatriate clients would know. They thought that, by having a prenuptial agreement, that would be the be-all and end-all, and that's it. But it doesn't work like that in Singapore, because in Singapore, the Women's Charter is pretty strong. And there's a lot of factors that comes into play when there's a divorce, like is there children involved? Is the lifestyle of the spouse, has it, dramatically improved when she got married to you? So all these are taken into consideration in a divorce, right? But what I understand, again, that prenuptials are not recognized. So definitely by getting a trust, it's a foolproof way of protecting your assets.
Yeah. And as you say as well, talking about difficult conversations, in some ways it's easier to set up structures than to have these difficult conversations, because let's say your daughter or your son is marrying someone who you are not particularly keen on, let's just say. It's a very awkward conversation to say, well, let's get that person to sign a prenuptial agreement. And that person might think, hold on a minute, you don't trust me? Why are you getting me to sign this document? Whereas if the assets are already in a trust, you probably don't need to have that conversation. Obviously, it's always an individual decision. Some people might want to do both things, right? But it does avoid those difficult conversations as well. Because I think a lot of people out there don't want to have those conversations for obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And I think another factor as well is, if you think about it, most high net wealth individuals and expats have assets and companies and properties all around the world, or at least in 2 or 3 different locations. And if that's the case, for some people, I guess they want to actually have like a holding company
Yes.
and a trust, because at least then there's like a centralized place to manage them.
Yep.
And it makes things like estate planning easier as
Yes,
well, right?
definitely.
Because not just estate planning, but let's say, God forbid, you were to become disabled or incapacitated. If you've got one holding company and trust that can manage all the assets, it makes it simpler, doesn't it?
Yes. So basically, in Singapore, how the trust system works is that you have a holding company. You got to set up a holding company, and that is the entity that holds your assets, right? If you intend to invest, then you might come up with a different corresponding company, a VCC, but it's a little bit more complicated. But end of the day, on top of this, you have a trustee. The trustee, you have the trust and the trustee. The trustee is the company or the corporation that administers the trust. The trust is not an entity. The trust is an agreement. Yep. So the trustee's duty is to follow whatever in the trust deed and the letter of wishes according to what the settlor wants. The holding company is just the instrument that holds all the assets.
Absolutely. Now, what are the biggest fears, would you say, for your new clients? Because ultimately, a trust, you are giving away assets on purposely because you don't want to own them directly yourself.
Yep.
So I guess in reality, control might be near the top, but are there any other like worries people have? And when it comes to control, are there still certain ways people can retain as much control as possible?
For how it works in Singapore is that you can start out the trust as a revocable trust first and eventually convert it to an irrevocable trust. But you can't do it the other way around. Okay? And once things are irrevocable, of course, you can't change it. But in Singapore, there's a few, there are few methods of control that you can have. Number one is that the trustee's job is just to administer the agreement in the trust deed. The trustee's job is not to take your money and invest it. A trustee doesn't do that. So once you have set up a trust, you have to appoint an investment manager. So let's say you set up a trust. You are the settlor. You can also be the investment manager. So you will take charge of investing the money wherever and however you want it. But of course, in accordance to the trust deed. So what you can put in the trust deed is like, okay, if the investment manager should be making at least 5% year to date over 3 years, for example, right? And of course, if that's your job, you have to fulfill that. And if you don't fulfill that, the trustee might take away your responsibility for that and get the settlor to choose someone else. So of course, the ironic thing is that if you are the settlor and the investment manager, then there'll be a bit of a conflict, right? So usually, sometimes the investment manager might not be the settlor also. But as the investment manager, it is at your own prerogative how you want to change certain things, how you want to invest the money. So do you still have control over your money? You still do. So you don't have to worry about that. And on top of that, you have something called the trust protector. What a trust protector's responsibility is that if the trust protector is not happy with the trustee, they can change the trustee. The trust protector is not the settlor. It's someone else. It can be the son. It can be one of the beneficiaries. Yeah. So there are still some provisions that that the family has when it comes to setting up a trust. But of course, most of it is still kind of set in stone.
Sure. Yep. And that also means that people can keep the same relationship. So let's say, for example, you've got someone who's a relatively wealthy individual. They've got their private banker or their wealth manager. Of course, they can change their accounts usually to a trust account. So say, for example, if one of my clients decided, you know what, I want to set up a trust in Jersey or Guernsey or Singapore, then it is possible to keep the relationship with me and then set up a trust, because the trust's only job is to follow the actual deed, right?
Yes.
So therefore, it is possible to keep the basic structure the same in terms of your investments. But as you say, if somebody prefers to do it yourself, DIY invest, they can put certain rules in the trust, right? Like saying, okay, 90% is invested into stocks, and these are the criteria, 10% in government bonds. So they can do that, right? But obviously, when it comes to things like distribution or things like that, also certain rules, they do need to set that in stone, don't they? But I think you can change the trust deed, right, if you want. That can be updated, can't it?
Yes, so you can update the trust deed, definitely, because the trust deed is a legal document. So yes, going back to what you said about keeping the relationship, or rather the structure, the same, and I think that's really important, because as a high net worth individual, you have taken years to set up, to build up your structure that works well for you. So even when you are setting up a trust, you're just putting an extra layer of protection without losing the structure. So I think that's really important. Your investment manager can still be your banker, or you can get an external asset manager to overlook all the bankers. So it just really depends how you want it. And going back to the trust deed, so when you set up a trust, there's actually two documents that you have to fill up. One is the trust deed, one is the letter of wishes. Now, the trust deed is legally enforceable, but the letter of wishes is not. But the letter of wishes will be a little bit more detailed, whereas the trust deed is a little bit more generic. Yep. So, for example, let's say for the trust deed, you can put who are your beneficiaries. Let's say you have 4 beneficiaries. You can just list down their names there. Now, and the letter of wishes, that's where you put what they will each get. Yeah. So, in this way, it protects them, because with your trust deed, because it is not stipulated how much they are getting, because it's a legal document, whatever assets that will go to them is not considered matrimonial assets. Whereas if you were to put, let's say, you have a son and a daughter, you put 50, my son will get 50%, my daughter will get 50%, in the trust deed, and one day they get divorced, that 50% of your son will be considered as matrimonial assets. Whereas if you put it in a letter of wishes, we will not be considered matrimonial assets. So I think that's another layer of protection that we actually advise clients to do.
Sure. And I think another factor here as well is some people think to themselves, well, if I've got assets in different countries, I should have wills in different countries, or I could invest in an insurance provider because I can list beneficiaries. But I think one of the key things about a trust is it gives you the ability as well to make certain rules, like, for example, if you become disabled or incapacitated. And also a trust can own pretty much any asset, right? In terms of it can own property, it can own stocks, it can own companies in numerous countries, because it's like a holding company. Whereas, of course, a will is just if you die, right? So in a way, a trust can act like a living will as well, for a lack of a better term. And obviously, when it comes to insurance companies, they're fantastic for just like maybe stocks and bonds and assets, and then moving them quickly to the beneficiaries if you die. But they can't hold, say, properties or businesses. So really, it's a way of saying, well, if something happens in my life as well, like disability or whatever, I can be covered as well.
This goes back to what I said right in the beginning, that as my job as an estate planner is actually to understand your situation and to provide you the tools and instruments that will help to fulfill the strategies that we agree on. So a will is part of the strategy. A will is part of a will is an instrument. A trust is an instrument, and in life insurance is also another instrument. It doesn't mean that if you use a trust, you don't need a will. It doesn't mean if you have a will, you don't need insurance, and vice versa, and all that. It all can be used in tandem. Because we want to specifically, structure things in a way to move things differently. Maybe an example will be like, let's say we talk about Singaporean couple, they have a private property in joint name, right? And let's say the husband starts a trust. So he can't put the property into the trust because he will need the wife's permission. And number two is that if you were to transfer the name into the trust, he will be incurring stamp duty because the trust is a different entity from him, right? So he has a trust, and what he do is that he and the wife will will the property upon their passing into the trust. So that's already using two different instruments. That's part of the wealth planning stage. Yeah. And then, of course, life insurance can come in a structure. So it just depends on how the life insurance will be used to help the planning. So some examples will be, let's say, if a client has 2 children and 1 house, how does he give the house fairly to the child or to both children, right? So for an example, let's say the house is worth $20 million and the older child, let's say, is a guy, married, moved out. The younger one is the daughter, still staying with the parents, and let's say both parents pass away. Now, if they were to just use a will to say that, hey, once I pass away, this house goes equally to my 2 child, right? The daughter is still staying there. She has no house of her own. Where can she move to? Can the brother say, yes, you can stay there? Definitely the brother can. But if she stays too long, the brother's spouse might be asking, hey, your sister is staying there rent-free. This $10 million is yours. What are you doing? There's, we have opportunity costs, that we might miss. So then you might need to force your sister to buy it from you, your half, or you get it to sell. And then there might be conflict, right? So where life insurance comes in is that, let's say, the father buys a life insurance on himself or the wife for $20 million, for example, right? And upon passing, the house goes to the daughter, the cash goes to the brother. So the brother gets cash, he's happy. The house goes to the daughter, she's happy. So that's a very, very basic way of how life insurance can come in with a will. Now, if you add a trust, another instrument that comes in, right? How you can do it is that you can, let's say, to buy a $20 million life insurance is too expensive, right? You can get something cheaper, let's say 5. Put it into a trust, put the property into the trust also, and have rules that states, okay, this house is held under trust for the next 5 years. After the 5th year, okay, the house is to be sold with the children having the first right of refusal. And if they both don't want to buy it, then the house will be sold and the proceeds will be split equally. So how does it all come together is that, let's say the father initially bought a $5 million life insurance, right? The initial $2.5 million for the daughter can be used as a down payment for her own house. And let's be honest, if in 5 years she still doesn't buy a house, then it's not, it's her problem, right? It's her fault that she didn't do it. But if she follows the rules, then yes, this, by using just these 3 instruments, it makes total sense. Because everyone is happy, everyone gets a fair share, and they do not incur additional cost. Yeah. So, this is how we actually, or rather how I advise clients on using different instruments to estate plan. So I would say honestly, not every plan requires a trust.
Yes.
Not every plan requires a life insurance. So it just depends on what you want, what you envision your assets to where you envision your assets to go, how you want to be distributed, and that's where I point the right instruments for you to use. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's holistic planning, isn't it? Because everyone's situation is different. Same with wealth management. Not everyone needs the same solution, right? Because if you're retiring tomorrow, you might not want the same thing as if you're retiring in 30 years. So these things all kind of go together, which is why wealth management companies often work in tandem with lawyers and tax people and trust providers to find the right solution. So let's have just a few quick fire questions. So can crypto be held in a trust in Singapore?
No.
No. Okay.
At this moment, it's still a very big question mark. The bigger trust companies will not touch it yet because MES has still not given them the green light. But so far, to my understanding, is no.
Now, what is the minimum wealth threshold realistically given the fees to set up a trust in Singapore?
I think it really depends. So maybe I can go more into this, right? It's that there's basically, I will break it down to two kinds of trusts, very simply. There's the living trust, there's a living trust and the testamentary trust. So a testamentary trust starts when the person passes on. Mm-hmm. A living trust starts wherever the person wants it to start, right? Now, in a testamentary trust, the trust is inside the will. And this is probably one of the most common kind of trusts nowadays because we must remember people pass away richer than when they are alive because of life insurance, right? So let's say if I'm just a middle class a person and I just buy an insurance of, let's say, $1 million, right? Obviously, I don't have that kind of money now, but it costs me about $1,000 a year. And let's say if I were to pass on in 2 years later, my family will get $1 million. So now in my will, I'll write that the $1 million will be given periodically to my wife and to my child. Now that's a testamentary trust, right? So testamentary trust can be pretty affordable because the fees are being paid by the assets in the trust, and that can be roughly about maybe $2,000 to $3,000 a year, which they'll take from the assets, right? Okay, so that's the most affordable way of having a trust, the testamentary trust. Now, what's bad about that is that it's very simple. There's not much rules that you can place in it, so it's usually more for simple planning, right? But of course, when you are of higher net worth and you need something more sophisticated, that's where you have a living trust. Now, a living trust obviously has come with more costs because you're audited. The trust is always audited by MES and external auditors. So that will probably cost you between 15 to 20,000 US a year. So I would say that if you want to start a living trust, a good threshold that makes sense to me is about between maybe 4 to 5 million USD. Then it does make sense to start a living trust, because when you put money in the trust, I don't think you're just going to make the money stay there. You want to invest. So you want to be able to get investment returns that's able to afford to pay the trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now that $15,000 to $20,000, does that include things like accounting fees for the company? Does that include everything or just the trustee fees?
Everything,
okay.
yeah, everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just a few more quick fire questions then. What is the biggest single reason, would you say, why people set up trusts in your case, in terms of your clients, even though we all know there could be 30 reasons? What would you say the one biggest reason is?
Surprisingly, I would dare to say that 90% of my clients will start up conversations with various reasons, but deep down, after talking to them and understanding them, the biggest reason is protection against the child's spouses. So basically the in-laws or outlaws, if you want to put it that way. Yeah. So that is quite a big reason. And in fact, I have a mentor in the US who I speak to sometimes. He's a business succession expert in US. And when I speak to him, his reasons in the US are the same. Protection against the child's future spouses. So it's something that we discuss, we like to share pointers because sometimes we think that it might be a cultural thing. But we realize that when it comes to money, money supersedes all culture. Yeah.
And also, what would you say is the biggest mistake people make when it comes to trust? Like, for example, I would imagine some people maybe they don't think about it enough before setting up the trust. In other words, let's say you've got someone who has got 10 million in net worth and they've got a business that keeps ticking along, doing well. It might actually make more sense in some cases just to start with 5 million in the trust, keep more direct control with the other 5 million rather than just going to 10 million straight away. Do you think that's a common mistake, or would you see other mistakes as being more prevalent?
Actually, I think that the biggest mistake someone can do is to not start a trust when they need to have a trust. Because a lot of them might be turned off by the cost of having a trust. To say that, hey, because the cost of $15,000 to $20,000 a year is just the accounting and the trustee fees, meaning that there's just your assets there. But if things can get more complicated, the amount might increase. So I can't tell you how much because we don't know how much. It's very individual, right? But of course, the trustees will be very transparent before they do anything. But let's just even look at the base fee of $15,000 to $20,000. Some people find that it might be a waste of money, and they trust that they do not need this to look after the assets because they trust their children. But I always say that the cost of you not doing it might be even higher in the future. So that to me is actually the biggest mistake when it comes to not setting up a trust, right? I would say that for people that actually do set up a trust, I think it's important to understand that when you're setting up a trust, it's not something that we talk, we get a trust deed, we sign it on the spot, in 2 hours we are done, we have dinner. No. A trust deed, or rather an estate plan, is a journey. It's a journey with a very, very far destination. The reason I say that is because even when if you intend to set up a trust today, we need to talk about how your family is, the dynamics, and then you do your trust deed and your letter of wishes according to how things are now. But in 2 or 3 years later, we always have to revisit, has anything happened? Did any of your child get married? Any of your child had their own child? The dynamics has changed. So we are always constantly changing the plan. So again, it's a little bit hard to make a mistake like that because, being a journey, if you take a wrong turn, you can just walk back and go back to the right path because the destination is so far away, and the destination might not even be your death because the destination is keeping the harmony within the family. So sometimes there are strategies which I use are even beyond having a trust, but the trust is just an instrument.
Absolutely. So great conversation, and thanks for coming in. What's the best way for people to contact you if they want to have a conversation about this?
You can contact me via my email or WhatsApp me through my number, which I think we will probably put at the...
Absolutely. We'll put it in the show notes, or of course you can always text me. I think most of you have my contact details. So thanks again for coming in.
No problem. Thank you so much, Adam, for this.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. And until next time, have a great day.